Hello and welcome back to a weekly market recap. I'm with Rich.
Hello, everyone.
And I'm Knight. Let's get to it. So this past week, we did see the market up 1.57%, but that alone is kind of a little bit misleading considering that on Friday, we were up 1.66%. So all the gains that we saw really did come from Friday, as we'll see in the later chart. Still year to date, we're up 5.81%. But really the market movers, it's two different stories. For the majority of the week, we have a lot of inflation fears and news around what is the economic data going to look like. We saw jobs numbers come in better, but still this fear around, well, what does the future look like? What is the new reopening trade, higher inflation? What are the bond interest rates doing? And eventually all those numbers did come out on Friday, better than what was expected. Now, in addition, we do have the Biden coming out with the 100 million shots in 52 days. So 100 million shots was originally going to be in 100 days. He did in 52. And now he wants to raise that to 200 million shots in 100 days. We have the infrastructure bill and some projections on where we think what might be happening to pay for all of these bills that we've had and what our hope would be going forward. So I'm going to share my screen and we can just look briefly on what happened over this past week. So as we see, we started the week off actually pretty nicely, up earlier in the week. And then we saw, again, as this inflation fear started to pick up, drop really down to our low, which was on Thursday. And then from there, we raised up a little bit. We opened high. And then Friday, it's been this up and down battle until about 2:30. And right at the end, what we see is we just take off dramatically to end on a high. So we'll see what happens. But really, when we are looking at why did that happen, it comes back to some really positive economic data. So Rich, inflation came in at, month over month, 0.1%. That's what that's what economists were expecting. And yet a lot of investors have been saying inflation's going to come back with this force. What are your thoughts on inflation, where we've seen it, where we haven't seen it?
Well, we've seen in other countries, most notably Japan and Italy and United Kingdom, where they've had very large debts and this fear that inflation was going to kick in, huge infrastructure spending, very low monetary policies, and inflation has not taken off as much as were expected. So it's kind of difficult because we do have demographic issues that are going on. We also have coronavirus issues, the pandemic going on, and a decrease in world economic trade. I'm expecting trade to pick up. I think that at least in the short term, we're not going to see a huge amount of core inflation. We may see some pickup, as Federal Reserve President Jerome said, concerning year over year, because we had a drop due to the pandemic last year. But in general, I think a lot of the inflation fears are misguided and will not come in as bad as people think. I also think that emphasizing getting people vaccinated and pushing out as many vaccines as they can that the Biden administration is doing is really good, because that's going to, once we get everybody vaccinated, we are going to be in a better shape economically, and we'll have people traveling again, and we'll see a general pickup in the entire economy. That's been our big drag. So dealing with that first seems to me to be a great idea.
Yeah, well, some of the fears around inflation have really come from the supply side, shutdown and issues. We've heard a lot about over the past months on these freighters, not even the freight carriers not being able to even leave some of these harbors. They're honestly too large is part of the issue. And I think that's partly what's been leading into this inflation fear. So to actually see the numbers come in relatively normal means that all these stories that have been being told over these past 2-3 months of we're having supply side shortages, it's going to lead to these massive spikes in what we see in inflation in normal goods. Now, we have seen inflation in some areas. We have seen inflation in, stocks and other real property. What we haven't seen inflation or these, massive rising in prices is kind of the normal consumer goods. Now, something also interesting about the past month, we did see a loss of 1% in consumer spending. Now, consumer spending is the largest part of GDP. So seeing that drop, yeah, it was a little bit expected because we did see some of the stimulus start to wind down, so they weren't getting as much benefit as before. So what we saw is as those federal, stimulus packages started to wind down, people stopped spending as much. So we did see minus 1% in consumer spending. But overall, I think to balance that out, as you were mentioning, the enhancements and the focus on getting these shots out and doing way better than were expected. Now, I just have to laugh because when when Biden first said we're going to get 100 million shots in the first 100 days, people were saying that's way too ambitious. You're crazy. Like, it's not going to happen. We did it day 52. He comes out and says, all right, we're going to now aim for 200 million. What's the first thing I see? He's being way too conservative. This is it. We're going to easily hit that number. Why is he going so low? You just can't win. And so do I think that I think 200 million probably is a relatively attainable target. I think we could actually potentially blow past it. He's not going to set the target way out of reach, but I think considering all facts with the rollouts, we're doing a great job. And as we've said this whole time, the best thing we can do for the economy is to get this pandemic under control. Once we do that, everything looks like it will start to come back. We've seen it. We've seen it in all these trial runs across the time. When we open up, the demand runs back, people are going out. And I do think that we have, a lot of pumped up demand that is going, everyone's looking to travel this summer. We'll see how it goes. But Rich, I know you wanted to talk about the infrastructure bill and the $3-4 trillion that is being allocated for that.
Yes, we've been talking about the need for a $3 to $4 trillion infrastructure bill for several years now. I remember back in 2009, that number came out and they were talking about that's what was needed to bring up all the bridges and waterworks, buildings, et cetera, for the country, rail lines and roadways up to speed. And it's fantastic that we're finally starting to look at it. I'm hoping that legislation gets passed, but I've been waiting for approximately 12 years now for the federal government to get behind a decent infrastructure bill. Now with it, we do have the issue that Republicans are saying there are a lot of other items being tossed in, but overall, this is exciting for me because I think it's something our economy needs.
Yeah, there's so many positive externalities that come out from really, really solid, amazing infrastructure. And that, like you said, roads and being able to travel, but also the digital and web infrastructure, the solar infrastructure, all these pieces that are being added, things that we can't even fully comprehend or understand at this moment because it's future technology that will be built off of the infrastructure. Like, what would it be to have 5G networks across the country where everyone can be access to internet faster on a reliable area? I mean, this could be so impactful in so many ways. very similar to what we saw when Ike was president back in the 50s and, investing in roads. At that time, that was the best way to stimulate the economy. And I think we could see something very similar if the right things are being addressed. Now, looking to the future, I wonder how much do we really need to focus as much on, what is the split going to be between looking at roads and looking at, other infrastructure digitally, solar. And so it'll be interesting to see how that breaks down. But overall, I think it's a win-win-win situation. We're creating jobs, creating a foundation to build off of, and the economy can grow from there. What's my fear is, how are we going to come up with the money? And now I think both of us agree that we don't expect any taxes to be raised this year. It's going to be a 6-month bill to, even try and pass it through. It's going to be a very difficult bill to pass through, considering the Democrats, hold a 50-50 in the Senate. They might need to try and, work their magic to get it through, maybe through a budget reconciliation or some other way. But what we do probably think is, look, midterms are coming up, in a year or two. And before then, the Democrats are probably going to want this either being passed, or they don't want to lose the control that they do have currently in the Senate without putting it through. So we do think that could be on the horizon.
Yes, my thoughts are that this sort of leads us into tax rates and tax increases. I think that it's a foregone conclusion that the Biden administration is going to raise taxes for corporations from the current 21% to 28% or higher. 28% would get it to about where most developed countries are. And I also think there are tax increases designed for people with incomes, household incomes of 400,000 and above.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to mention that, raising the rate from 21% to 28%, we're still far below the 35% rate that we had before, that actually was detrimental, I believe, to our corporations and allowing them to plan for offshore money. I think dropping from the 35 to 21 really did recapture a lot of those funds that we were looking to do. And I think raising it back up to 28 might be reasonable, but at the same time, my mind keeps going to the 441 billion that the IRS is losing every year from people just, tax evasion, people criminally avoiding paying their taxes. And that's where I would love to see, maybe instead of raising taxes on the people who are, making over, 400,000, raising corporate rates, if we could get some additional resources to actually just make sure that the people who should be paying X amount of taxes are paying their fair share. And then we might not have to raise taxes. Again, that's a utopian society where we don't really live. But that I would love to really, instead of just going at raising rates, seeing maybe we could raise rates, but also really put something in there to go farther on actually creating a system where people are paying.
And I think it's very doable. What we could do is have the government come up with a preliminary tax based upon what people earn, because almost everybody has reported income either through wages or interest, and then send people bills. And if you disagree with how much the government thinks you owe, you then file a return. That's sort of a system that is used in Europe by some of the Scandinavian countries, where the government figures out what your tax is and it's developed afterwards. But it's not one that we use currently, but maybe that's what we should be doing.
Yeah, well, that would make too much sense. So the likely not the route we'll probably be headed. But either way, we appreciate you guys listening to us this week. As always, we're here to support you. Your money's here to support you. If you have any questions, please reach out. As always, like, comment, subscribe. If this video was helpful, please share it to others. We appreciate you guys tuning in.